أهلا وسهلا. I know that I have to speak in English. I'll try to be as inclusive as possible, of course, but yeah, this is one thing, is that I move a lot. So I'm Salma Al-Khaldi. I've been working in the field of education for the last 25 years. In 20 years, actually even more than 25 years, 28 years.
Sorry, if you want the mic to
okay. So yeah, at least, or maybe, I don't know if I read this or together. Can you hear me?
maybe I get, or the feeling is better to if you want to move.
Turn off that one. Okay, it's okay. I won't move at the moment. No problem.
عشان حدا بده يحرك لك السلايدات اذا بدك.
لا انه يعني بمعنى اذا حكيت مرات ما هو بالسلايد بضلها ثابته، مش ححطها طول الوقت. بهذا المعنى يعني مش رح يعني رح اعتمد على النقاش. So I'm very glad to be with all of you today. As I said, I've been working in the field of education. I think on different levels, in the sense that I've worked in special education centers years ago, in mainstream schools, and basically now I'm working in Jerusalem. I'm in inclusive education, specialized in inclusive education in particular, with Terdezom, Italy. For the last 4 years now, we've been involved in promoting inclusive education in the schools in Jerusalem, particularly, of course, in the Palestinian schools that are under the Awqaf schools there. So basically, this is my background. I see myself more of an advocate and a practitioner as well, of course, in that field. So this is also part of how I see inclusive education as well. So I'm glad to share some time with you today. Hopefully we'll engage in many discussions and see, I mean, this is basically the purpose of our presence today, is to all of us engage with all our experiences together as much as possible. So basically, I chose to say it's like inclusive education, as all of you can see on the screen, is a principled approach to the development of education in society. And then, this is why inclusion is basically a cross-cutting issue. It's a rights-based approach. The right to education, obviously, is enshrined in various international conventions and treaties, beginning in 1948. So I won't go through them. But the idea is that this is where the core of the concept of inclusive education is basically is enshrined in human rights and a rights-based approach. And then all since 1948 till 2007, maybe more. If I'm not really specialized in that field. If there are any other conventions that I didn't mention after 2007, possibly already it's there, and already it shows how it's cross-cutting issue when we talk about indigenous people, persons with disabilities, diversity in cultural expression, discrimination against women, rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, So already the core of inclusion is there, and as well is within all the legal framework that supports inclusion. Throughout the journey, of course, we have to reflect on our experiences, and this is where I would like for sure to engage together. So there'll be a reflection on Terdezom's journey in promoting inclusive education also in Jerusalem, as an example of the practices and the challenges and the achievements as well, and how we really would be able to move forward together. And so the first thing I wanted to throw in our minds is that we all have different perceptions, I'm sure, or definitions of inclusion or inclusive education. I actually meant to write here inclusion or inclusive education, because at times I think it's more a matter of seeing it as an inclusive education, but then inclusion could be also, I don't know. So I was just thinking of maybe for a few minutes, if anybody would like to share at the beginning, coming to this workshop as a cross-cutting issue, what does inclusive education or inclusion might draw or shine a light somewhere in your minds. So I don't know, this is how I think today we'll also be moving forward. I mean, it won't be, whoever wants to really contribute in the discussion, I'd more than be happy about it in the sense that it's not just a presentation, it's an engagement. So would anybody like to share? I don't know. Okay. تفضلي معي.
I think inclusion relates to a term that relates to being inclusive. Okay, we're going back to the same word, but I think it relates to other parts of life. But inclusive education means that we are being inclusive in class, including all children in class. But inclusion also means that we're doing that in the community and in other parts, in other places, in other sectors.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's one in one, but inclusion is more like concept-wise inclusive.
Yeah, it's a term.
Yeah.
By reading these two words, I think maybe inclusion is more passive. It means maybe something that you protect the person with disability, while inclusive education is more active because you give the possibility to improve, to become independent. By reading these two words, the way that I think.
So I think it's how to accommodate through education, accommodate for the different capabilities of students, and not just have a general direction of how to like educate and be able to take into consideration children with different backgrounds, different capabilities, and so on.
I think inclusive education is the right for everyone to learn, no matter what is his sex, his age, his gender, his status, or where he comes from.
Thanks a lot for all the input, because I mean, this is part of, I think, what we are going to engage in. I mean, as everybody knows, inclusion has become a buzzword. It's very fashionable. Not only, wherever you go, everybody talks about inclusive education. And so it's some, I mean, becoming, and it's not only in Palestine, it's not only in the globe, I mean, everywhere. Not only, I mean, Palestine. Palestine is part of the international community, and obviously there's a lot of, many projects in inclusive education, people are interested, but at the same time, there's still some confusion. I mean, apparent. I mean, from what we're actually just had the input, I think that we're very much on a very similar track, I guess, in that perspective. But then, in some countries, inclusion is still seen or thought as an approach of serving children with disabilities, basically, and it's more of a restricted approach within the general education settings. And it's not only in some countries we're talking about the practices that are taking place when you go to teach with teachers. When you talk about inclusion, it's more perceived as like having a child with a disability or a learning difficulty within the regular system. But how is also not even the next step. But then internationally, it's increasingly been seen as more of a broadly as a reform that supports and welcomes diversity among all learners. And the aim of inclusive education is to eliminate social exclusion, which is a consequence of several factors: attitudes, responses to diversity, race, social class, ethnicity, religion, whatever. So basically, it starts from the belief that education is a basic human right and the foundation of a more just society. And I think for us as Palestinians, this is even a principle that is also entrenched in our strive for justice. I personally, and I think many people like me as well, perceive inclusion also in that perspective as well. So inclusion is a principled approach to education, and it's concerned with the quest for equity, social justice, and participation. It's about the removal of all forms of barriers of discrimination and oppression. But then, these are all nice words, right? So, I mean, how do we move forward? How do we perceive? What are the challenges? But basically, it's an unending process that involves the participation of all individuals. But then you have to really, it's participation and creation also of settings, systems, procedures, policies that really put the inclusive values into practice. And it involves everybody. It should involve children, young people, women, whatever. And it's not just about a particular group of children. I won't read that. It's very clear. But I mean, like UNESCO clearly elaborates and clearly defines what inclusive education is. And I started with inclusion and inclusive education because when I was talking about inclusive education as a principled approach, because inclusion is the driving force, is the principle, is the approach. But then when we're talking about inclusive education, we're talking about how it's perceived within the education sector. But then when we talk about other sectors of the community, it's also an inclusive, it's the approach, it's the principle which drive us to where we see how our society is moving towards. So it's basically responding to diversity of the needs of all learners, and as one of the ladies here was talking about, like it's reducing the exclusion, adapting, and addressing the needs of every single person within the community. So, and at the end, it's also a responsibility as well for the regular systems, and since we're talking about education, of the regular system to educate all children how to create this setting to be welcoming for all, a removal of barriers, basically. I wanted to share with you, they're very classic slides, maybe some of you already are familiar with, but I feel that they're very, very strong in a way that we need to sometimes understand. As I said, I mean, it's not a matter of understanding as much as really realizing that within our practices, there's still, regardless how much we really believe in the nice principles of inclusion, but then in the practice itself, we really need to stand and say, well, inclusion, special education, integration, what's the difference between those three ways of perceiving our way of moving forward within the school systems and society as a whole? And I don't know if you agree with me that when we talk about inclusion, it's also mixed with special education, is it? Do you think? Because, sorry? Okay, you mean who's the part of the class? Okay, so in that sense, yeah. But as practices as well, yeah. So the confusion is there. I mean, people working in the field, you can see that yes, there's or maybe a link, or maybe confusion as well. But then here I wanted to share with you what's the difference between special education and inclusion. Special education, we have here an education system where it's a system. Oh, okay. Okay. With special education, we have a classroom where we all expect that children have to, they're normal, so-called normal children, of course. And in the classes, usually, we have the same books, we have the same examination, we have the same material that we need to take, and then, so more or less, everybody has to be the same. And then we have children, so-called children with special needs, who are different because they cannot fit in that system. So society has created for them special settings so that, because they can't fit here. You can't have those square pegs, they can't fit here. They need different systems. This is the reason why they're not part of the school system. Because, I mean, you see from parents at times, They tell you, but my son cannot go to the school because he cannot really cope with the school. The teacher says, well, no, this child cannot be part of the school system because he's different. The school is not for him or for her. So this is where society developed everywhere, where we had different settings, placements for children with so-called special educational needs and for so-called normal children. Then we decided that this is not right. We said that children have to be part of that school system because we cannot allow their exclusion. So what happens is that we work on the squared pegs, we give the child therapy, I'm not saying I'm against giving a child who needs speech therapy, but this is what we do. We try to fix that child because he won't be able to fit if we don't fix him. If he needs all the intervention for that child, the focus is on that the child is the problem, therefore we need to give that child whatever that child needs, and then that child would be ready to fit in that system. So what happens here? The system stays the same, the child must adapt or fail. And usually, research and practice tells us that most children fail in that system because the system remains the same. No matter how much skills that child has acquired, but he goes back to the classroom, he has to sit for the same examination, he has to, the same book. Okay? Yeah, sorry, would you like feel free if you want to discuss. Yeah? Okay. So, in an inclusive education, which is exactly like society, everybody's different here. We don't have just the round pegs or the square pegs. Our children are different, friends, everything. Flowers are different, trees are different, nature is also very diverse, not only human beings. So, what we need to do is that for the child who's, let's imagine he's the square peg, to be able to fit into that school system, I have to create space for him that is part of what he needs. So he can engage and participate and achieve within that system. So inclusive education basically is changing the systems. Changing the system to adapt, removing the barriers, to adapt to the needs of each one of us. I just want to for 1 or 2 minutes, just to talk about, and as well, it's very, very common that we hear about the medical model of thinking and the social model of thinking, and it's very familiar within the literature and the research. Like we adopt a social model of thinking and not a medical model of thinking, or it's very common as well that, no, this approach is very much medical model oriented. Medical model, and if anybody would like to share this with all of us, I'm more than happy. I'm going to share with the discussion with this slide. The medical model looks at the person as the problem. The person is faulty. We really concentrate on the diagnosis, on the labeling. I mean, you go to the teacher and she says, I cannot do anything with that child because I don't know what he has. And if you tell me, like, he has a reading difficulty, even if I, impress her, this child is dyslexic. Well, great, good. Then I know, but does anything change? Nothing changes. So basically, the emphasis on the diagnosis, and after the diagnosis comes the labeling. Impairment becomes the focus of attention. Assessment monitoring programs of therapy are imposed, and usually segregation and alternative services. This is very common in Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem, with the Israeli municipality schools, you have an option of services. So what happens is that when, option of services in the sense that if a child is diagnosed and that he's unable to fit within the system, then this child is usually sent to the special education schools. So in that perspective, here in the West Bank, it's different in the sense that there are some special education settings for sure, but they're less. So you find many children within the school system who are excluded. I'm not saying included physically, but excluded in the sense of how much is really the school addressing their needs. So basically, the society remains unchanged. And this is the medical model where I think that, okay, I have tonsillitis, I take a course of antibiotic, and then that's fine, you know, I get, and that's it, basically. But then, what are the reasons? So, social model is where you look at the person, he is valued, there's a concentration on the strengths and needs, you identify the barriers and you develop solutions. And now an outcome-based program based on identifying the barriers is designed. Resources are made available to these ordinary services, which is very important, is where do I allocate these resources to address the barriers that are confronting that child. And of course, there's an encouragement of social relationships and welcoming, diversity is welcomed and every person is included. So, society in this perspective is obviously evolves in a positive manner. Okay, this is quite a big slide. I tried to divide it, but sorry, I didn't. But then we'll have for discussion. We can stop in every. So inclusive education is a constantly evolving process of change and environment within schools and the wider education system to make education more welcoming, learner-friendly, and beneficial for a wide range of people. Inclusive education is not a one-off project that can be delivered and completed within a short time frame. It's impossible. It's a process. It's principles. It's how this process evolves. It's about restructuring education, cultures, policies, and practices so that they can respond to a diverse range of learners, male, female, non-disabled, from different ethnic backgrounds, language, religious or financial backgrounds of different ages, whatever. It's focused, inclusive education is not just focused on developing education for learners with disabilities within mainstream settings. It is about changing the education system so that it's flexible enough to accommodate any learner. It is not about trying to change the learner so that he or she can fit more conveniently into an unchanged education system. And this is usually where the focus is on. The child takes extra classes, extra support, whatever, but then the burden is on the child and the family's burden and the family's shoulder, and not on adapting and changing the system. It is an ongoing effort to identify and remove barriers that exclude learners within each unique situation. It is not based on following a set formula of actions that can be used in any situation. So it's not what Suhair or Salma or if I have a formula for Salma to fit in, it is how to address each child according to his or her needs. It's about identifying and removing barriers to learners' presence and access to education participation. Anyway, it's not focused just on helping learners to gain access to school or classrooms. It's very important to gain access. But when the child gets to the school, the most important thing is not to be excluded within the school system. It's not just a matter of gaining accessibility. It's gaining quality, engagement, and participation within that school system. It's focused on solving attitude, practice, policy, environmental resource barriers. It is not just about overcoming financial and environmental challenges. You go to many schools and in many of your projects, and when you discuss about inclusion, they tell you how costly it is. It is not about how costly it is. It is about making the changes and allocating the resources, obviously. A process in which all stakeholders should participate in. Teachers, learners, parents, community members, government policymakers, local leaders, NGOs, etc. So it's a cross-cutting issue in everything. Everybody needs to be involved to make the change. a project that can be implemented. It is not a project that can be implemented solely by external experts or education officials. It cannot be like this. Something that can happen outside the formal education system, inclusion, as well as in the formal school environments. Inclusive education can happen in learning spaces that are non-formal, alternative, community-based. So it's not just school-based set of practices. From young children to elderly adults. It is not just a process that happens in the schools. It's an ongoing journey. Tell me about the time, because Andrea, you were telling me we still have, okay. Sorry, because I was told that the break needs to take place at 3:15, so that's why I'm asking. Okay.
Maybe at the beginning, when you say that it cannot, when you say it can't be delivered and completed in a short time frame, as we are talking about emergency, how does it match with that?
Good question. Good question, because I mean, I know that this workshop is inclusive education in an emergency context. Emergency in Palestine. This is really quite a sensitive issue. Yeah, it's an yeah, exactly. I mean, one way emergency within the context, it has to be. There's no a sudden emergency unless we have a tsunami, okay, or a tornado. Yeah, there are specific emergencies that take place. Obviously, in Gaza, last summer there was a state of war, and obviously it was the security level was higher than usual, not even higher. It was more than a tsunami. Okay, so in the context is that when you really need to support any inclusive education or any project within an inclusive approach, which I believe that all projects should be within an inclusive approach, it has to take in consideration the context, the prior context, and in what emergency context now you have to relate it for after. Otherwise, it will be a short-term service provider, and it's a cycle, and all of us, I think, or here know that very well. It becomes a cycle of projects that deliver maybe very good services at times, maybe not, I don't know, it all depends on the project itself. But at the end of the day, there are limitations. So yes, if you want to build an inclusive intervention, even if it's in a short-term project, it has to be linked totally. And that's why today I wanted to share with you a little bit about the inclusive education policy, the new Palestinian inclusive education policy, that has been an accumulation of several efforts of the whole process of everybody engaged in education. Not everybody, but many of the people engaged in organizations or in the Ministry of Education, the public and the private field. And it's very important that even within the short-term projects, in an emergency case, and sometimes in the sense that, yes, you have emergency situations that are taking place at that time, you have to really, I mean, like Jerusalem, like Khalil, Hebron, like Area C, there are sometimes situations that, yes, you have to really respond to higher alert situations at times, but then it has to refer back to what has been built, what has been done, and then to be linked for also what is to come forward. So it cannot be just, yeah, so I hope I'm clear in how I see it. Yeah. Anybody else would like to do, yeah? Anybody else would like to, I mean, share in that perspective? Okay? Thanks, Leah. Because I think, yeah. Okay. Anyway, since I talked about inclusive values, I always like to maybe emphasize on the concepts of the values when we talk about equity, compassion, respect for diversity, human rights, participation, community, and sustainability. So, if we want to be also sustainable, I mean, these are values. Sustainability on all levels. Sustainability is preserving what we have and valuing it and making sure that it's of value and of growth. In that perspective, yes, inclusive education is like that, because when you value, when it's a principled approach and rather a project-based, whether it's short-term, by the way, it's not only short-term or even long-term. It's not even the duration. It's how you also, but in a short-term projects even, it's, in a sense that it's not just a service, it's a principled approach. Okay? Hope I'm clear about that. Okay. Well, obviously, I wanted to share with you our journey. I mean, reflecting on the practice that was taking place in our journey in Jerusalem, in the schools. We've been working as Terre des Hommes Italy in the field of inclusive education for the last 4 years, and basically within 2 projects. One is ongoing now, and hopefully we're continuing. So, and this is how today I would like to also discuss with you all. We will be sharing as well our experiences, and we will be reflecting on our work together, whether as students or not necessarily educators, I mean as such, but all of us has a valuable contribution in how, in our work in the different sectors. And I'm very aware that we have here colleagues who are working in different sectors, like psychosocial, WASH, and other areas. And this is how I see how we would like to link as well. And this is why I overemphasize the principles of inclusion and how it cross-cuts all our work that has to deal with our presence in the community, and this is who we are, I guess. Okay, so inclusive education is a very challenging, not only, I mean, all the process of change obviously is very challenging. Education systems throughout the world are faced with the challenge of providing effective and quality education. We don't want just education, we want quality education. Quality education is not high grades or high marks. Quality education is participation, is learning, is growth, is achievement. And this is what we want for our children, not just to be in schools. Because there's a discrepancy in the number. This is one of the points I wanted to discuss about the challenges, about the dropouts. In Palestine, most of our children attend schools, by the way, in West Bank and Gaza. We have a very low dropout rate, but in Jerusalem, it's an alarmingly high dropout rate. But it's also worrying about even children who don't drop out officially from the schools, but the quality of education that they receive in the schools, and whether the diversity and the needs is actually addressed. For Palestinians, the challenge is twofold. A challenge of any education system in providing quality education and equity, and particularly in East Jerusalem, without saying, discriminatory practices of the Israeli occupation, particularly, it's very, very clear these days. Of course, we're not just saying that all the problems are just in the education system are just due to the occupation. We have other challenges that are also common to all education systems that exist within the school system. The challenges of the school systems itself, the traditional teaching methodologies that are practiced in the schools itself, the attitudes and the cultural barriers also that exist in our society towards the exclusion of children with disabilities, or on some occasion not even that. We'll be sharing together, we're working in a school community in Zayim in Jerusalem, where 40%, correct me, it's 40% of the school population commute every day, and they live, not only commute, they live in the Bedouin community, Zamba Bedouin community. They are excluded 1/3 of the year from the schooling system because they have no access to the school. So this is also a form of exclusion as well. So there are attitudes in a sense that as well a negative attitude towards the capabilities of children achieving within the regular school system. Okay, so we'll start sharing together our exciting journey. One of the most important things is that, and it refers to what Goya we were saying now about the short-term projects. We build on what exists. Short-term projects, if they are not building on what exists, obviously there's a big question mark on the achievements and the outcomes. So within our journey, and I really wanted to reflect towards our journey in a sense that as an example, but basically to reflect on it as core principles of also inclusion and inclusive education in particular. In a sense, inclusion within an educational setting. So, it has to be a collaborative journey. In the case of Jerusalem, it started with collaborating with the authorities, and not only. I mean, here, but basically it's with the local community, the kindergartens, the schools, the principals, and listening to the needs and building on what exists. I'm not saying it's an ideal situation, nothing's ideal, but this is, in a sense, that this is what we all need to reflect on, and building and valuing what exists and mobilizing the existing resources. That's why valuing and mobilizing existing resources is actually a core principle also of inclusive education or inclusion as well. Because if you don't value what exists and you don't mobilize the existing resources, then obviously there's something lacking. Okay? Okay. I would like to share with you another thing. We just talked about the barriers towards education. And this is one of the very clear barriers. Barriers can be walls, separation walls, yeah, totally, I mean, at the same time, I mean, in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and everywhere, in Bethlehem, we have barriers that we are unable to deal with some of them, but they exist. And in this case, as a core principle, as a core... okay, it's there. Okay, thanks. I thought you were telling me it didn't work, and maybe we can use it. Okay. I'm sure somebody here likes this poster, has been part of a long process in it as well. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you that this was a journey towards inclusive education. And I started now with the core principle of the first thing, you build on what exists. What exists can be really, really very, very challenging. But you have to build on what is there, what resources are available. And as I said, you value it, you mobilize it, and then you really can invest in it as well. So, but one of the core principles as well is dealing with inclusive education as removing the barriers. So I wanted to share that part at least, and then we'll go to the other slides. Barriers of, we have child detention, we have checkpoints, we have the segregation wall, we have the number of dropouts. I mean, at least 36%, at least, and I'm saying this with a lot of pain, at least, because we don't have precise sources of data in the Jerusalem context because of the multiplicity of the providers, education providers. Israeli municipality, the Ma'arif, the Israeli Ministry of Education, the Palestinian Ministry of Education that has no official status but also functions under Al-Awqaf, the UNRWA schools, the private schools who, for financial reasons, have most of them, 97% of them have also been registered, unfortunately, in Al-Ma'arif schools due to many problems, basically financial problems for survival, basically. But of course, even that has many implications. So in Jerusalem, the barriers are many. Everywhere there are many, in Palestine and in the world, but in Jerusalem in particular, we have an alarming number of dropout. At least 36% of children don't finish the school, at least. The number of child detainees, Jerusalem, Hebron, is also very, the attitude barriers. At least 2,000 students cross checkpoints every day. So this is a poster that shows the journey, and I'll be walking with you in it in the different perspective. We talked about the practice barriers, the traditional teaching methods, inflexible curriculums and assessment procedures. So we're not just talking about the political circumstances that sometimes are much bigger than us, that we're unable to solve these barriers. But at the same time, when we're talking about the practice barriers, we are talking basically about traditional teaching methodologies. Practice barriers, not only in education, I mean, all other sectors, it's also a matter of how we deal with not just talking about the schools, even the higher education and other institutions. So it's basically a matter of how you implement your time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's just because I don't want you to miss the break, because apparently at 3:15 the lady has to leave after that, so that's it. And it's good to have a break at times. Okay, tamam. Just somebody was looking at his watch and I thought maybe. Okay. So, I mean, basically we're talking about traditional methodologies of teaching, and basically these traditional methodologies result in excluding children from outside the school system and within the school system. So we have many students sitting in the desks in the schools, but are actually excluded because the education system is not addressing their needs. Okay? Attitude barriers. This is a big, so here comes advocacy. We're talking about advocacy, child protection, we're talking about right to education, raising awareness. In that perspective, we are connecting all our efforts towards any humanitarian or whatever projects that we are working towards, and how we connect our work together. Attitude barriers are a very big obstacle. Policy barriers. Obviously, I mean, even if this is, I think, one of the most important problems that we face, is that how do we deal with the problems that arise in the sense that my practices are very inclusive in class or maybe within my organization or within the community, but then, oops, comes the test, the exam. I have to do the same exam. The policy of the school tells me that to be able to pass that system, you have to sit exactly, because there's no policy that supports the diversity. So you really need to work on all the essence of policies, attitudes, and practices. And this is, I think, here, later, after the break, maybe I would like to talk about the barriers, the resources, and the support. But I would like to also emphasize on the 3 dimensions. And there's, by the way, a typing mistake here. It's not inclusive. It's here. Sorry. So just to mention it. Okay. So the 3 main dimensions of inclusion and inclusive education, inclusive practices, are the triangle of the 3 dimensions. In the sense that if the inclusive practices are evolving, but then there are obstacles of the policies, then the evolvement and the development of the inclusive practices are actually put on hold, in a sense that they cannot really develop, they cannot really move forward. And at the same time, if they are supported with policies, all this triangle would affect also in producing and building inclusive cultures and creating inclusive cultures. So without the 3 dimensions together, and these are the 3 areas that we need, I mean, if I want to talk about, let me say an example, a practical example of, if I go to a school and I train the teachers on the best practices ever possible that really can address the needs of the children, okay? But then the policies of the educational system does not support those practices. No, in no way. Then I'm actually draining my efforts, overburdening the teachers, and even frustrating them, because I'm actually not supporting as practitioners, as advocates, as parents, in pushing towards supporting the development of the policies, or even nowadays, even supporting what's existing, because we have a very good inclusive education policy that is to be printed very, very soon. And based on that, in a sense that if we really design our work and our intervention with the projects on specific areas and not handle the other areas, then we really are lacking something. There's something that's missing and not sustainable, and that does not lead to growth as such. For those 3 dimensions, are extremely important. It's extremely important in all levels, whether a teacher, a parent, or a project has to realize that on all three levels, we all have a role to play, regardless of whether, in a sense that even if I do inclusive practices, I'm actually supporting the development of the policies, but it has to be a cycle of all stakeholders. All stakeholders, meaning parents, meaning organizations, meaning local authorities, meaning everybody involved in the process of change. So, okay.
Maybe before you skip,
Yeah.
we can have a break now.
Sure, because I wanted to talk about the Palestinian inclusive education policy, and there's something I would like to discuss with you also, or with all of you. Okay. So I just wanted to share briefly, because this is not, I mean, I don't know, in future, I don't know, workshops or whatever, meetings, not necessarily with me, but with other venues, I think that sharing the inclusive education policy is very, very important, and it's going to be published. Already it was launched last year, officially launched, but then it was revised, went through a process of revision. I'm talking about an inclusive education in the Palestine. It's a national inclusive education policy that was formulated as a result of the experience in the field of the ministry since its establishment in 1994. So, I mean, the process of inclusion, and in 97, the Palestinian Ministry of Education, I'll just give a brief background without, there are no slides, but in 1997, and this actually is interesting to talk about even okay. I just want to share it briefly because it's also related to the concept of projects, maybe also that perspective. In 1997, the Palestine Ministry of Education, the Palestinian Ministry of Education, adopted, not actually adopted, started a pilot project in inclusive education in 1997. And it was like a year, 2 years, and then 3 years. It was pilot, okay? And it was like a project funded from, I think, UNESCO, whatever, other organizations as well, Diakonia, NAD, I think something like this. I mean, with all good not only intentions, but it was at the time, just after the Salamanca 1994 declaration, which was a very important breaking point towards addressing the needs of children with the challenges. And this is where I sometimes, maybe if you've noticed, I don't use the terminology children with special educational needs, because this implies that they have special needs, and this implies, it's not, I'm not saying that it's not to be used, it's used, many people use it, but it actually implies that a child needs special, he has special needs, and therefore you need special forms of intervention. But then if you look at a child with additional needs or with challenges, then you're actually looking at a child as a child, but that might need additional support. So, exactly, within the existing system. Thank you, Suhair. In a sense that if the system is diverse enough, then this so-called extra support would be accommodated within the diversity that is actually given to all. So what is given to that child, because I need visual flashcards, pictures, is very enriching for everybody. So if it's available to address Suhair's need, because this is the way she learns, but it's there for everybody, it's also, so Suhair's presence in the class, although she has a so-called need, yeah, is actually a source of richness for others. So this is how you, at the end, I know it sounds very ideal, but it happens. It exists, and you really need to nurture that and to really have this as the value that drives your work. So in 1997, going back, I sometimes go to different issues. 1997, the Ministry of Education started its journey it was at the time of Salamanca, World Declarations, and there was a project on the table of the Ministry of Education, of course, Palestine is a country that relies on funding and projects. And so it was a very, very, I think, important step within the ministry. But we started in 97, there was no policy. The practices were still very traditional throughout the years. And not only that, after that, now the trend in the ministry, who knows what's the trend in the Ministry of Education and how they adapt and support children with learning difficulties. I know many of you know. And what, I mean, in the schools now, resource rooms, okay? Resource rooms. So basically, the Ministry of Education adopted in 97 an inclusive education project. It was a pilot project for 3 years. And then in 2004, the Ministry of Education started promoting the system of opening resource rooms. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm saying it's part of the process of development and how the education system is developing as such. So all the projects were not really addressing the needs of, not addressing, I wouldn't use that word maybe, but not necessarily built on a vision, a common vision. So if other projects or organizations or donors promote the presence of resource rooms. Resource rooms are actually, kids go to the school, they receive support in English, sorry, not at all English, in Arabic and math, just from 2nd to 4th grade, okay? In 1st grade, if a child has challenges, then, they have to wait. They have to wait. They have to wait to be referred to the resource room. So basically, it's more of an integration close to a medical model approach. The thing is that, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, is that throughout that, people in the field, and there are many practices, very inclusive practices, here and there, teachers and discussions and dialogue within the Palestinian educational system as practitioners, as advocates, as principals, or whatever. So it reached a point that the Ministry of Education really, there's a need to clarify a policy that drives the actions as well, and is a reflection of what is to be perceived for the best for the children. Anyway, so to make it brief, I wanted to share with you some. I personally think that, anyway, I don't want to discuss now what I think. Inclusive education, okay? Palestine inclusive education, it's supposed, as I said, it's supposed to be printed in 2015 now. I mean, within weeks or days, I don't know, but it's under being printed. But, okay, so inclusive education is focused on building an education system that embraces diversity and prevents discrimination. As such, it is a vital step in creating a just and inclusive society. It needs to be recognized as much more important for Palestine than just a model for delivering education. Our Palestinian vision of inclusive education highlights clearly that an inclusive school is one which is child-friendly and child-centered. A child-friendly school recognizes and supports the child's basic rights, not only in education, but also in social equality, protection, health, nutrition, cultural education, and the right to a voice within a democratic education environment. We're talking about all sectors of children, growth, community, health, protection. So we're not just talking about inclusion of a group of children, whether children with disabilities or specific learning needs, who are obviously the most vulnerable for exclusion, and obviously we need to advocate for their rights, but within the broader vision of the rights for all children. And I want to make it very clear, when we talk about the broad vision of inclusive education, this does not mean not recognizing the specific needs of the different groups of people or individuals who are vulnerable, more vulnerable than others for other reasons, depending on the context and the situation. And it's very important also to accommodate. That's why, by the way, the ministry also adopts a twin-track approach, an inclusive twin-track approach, in the sense that all the support and the services have to be accommodated within the general education system, but taking into consideration the individual needs that might arise, and I have to address the individual needs so that I don't address it just by fixing, of course, the child, but address it by removing the barriers. But at the same time, if this person needs specific forms of support, it is the duty and the responsibility to accommodate for that as well. So I took those. It's a 23-page policy, and I chose those parts of just to see that, to tell you that any future intervention has to build and has to support this very positive, I believe, this very positive policy, and this is where our role is. And this is where we go back to building on what exists, valuing the process of where the ministry has reached. There are many challenges. I'm not saying that everybody in the ministry is actually on board even on all the concepts that are there. What I'm saying is that we have to move forward in the sense that we have a valuable document which is a result of a journey, of experiences, of dialogue as well. And empower also the ministry and the practitioners also in how to make this happen. Okay? So I just wanted, one of the slides is that, as I said, this in itself is it needs a lot of discussion, but I wanted to show how many areas that we are talking about. Like, we're talking about to contribute. These are the main guidelines that the ministry, in its policy, will commit itself to in ensuring that this policy is a reference paper, that it's up to anybody in the field to actually activate it and use it to promote the rights of the children. So it's a commitment towards contributing to improving the quality of education. It's a commitment to access to education. It's a commitment to increase access to education for all by eliminating environmental, attitudinal practice and resource barriers. There are many, of course, sections behind each one. As I said, I will not go through everyone, but I just wanted to highlight it so that you're aware of the presence of this policy, and not only you're aware of the presence of this policy, and to support in making it I don't know, vital or whatever, they were active. Okay? So there's also a role of advocacy. There's a role of ensuring inclusive education. Advocacy and implementation covers full range of education from early childhood to vocational, non-formal and adult education. It's about accessibility, parents' involvement. It's about, so basically there's a cross-cutting issue in all aspects of our intervention and role as educators. Yes.
The barriers to the access of the market of the work for the person with special needs is something that you address within your journey in support of inclusive development, inclusive education, or is something apart? Yes, the access to the market of the work for the people who have special needs, because maybe you can give the opportunity to a person with disability or with special needs to graduate in a normal school, but then I'm sure that in the market of the works you will face the same problems that you faced before, the cultural policy and other issues. So I would like to know if it's something that you are doing the same level at the same time with this policy, or is something apart, and who is supposed to take care about this?
Yeah, it's a good question, because actually the Ministry of Education realizes very well that many sectors need to be involved. You're talking about even higher education, also universities, before even the workforce. You're talking about transportation, accessibility to transportation. You're talking about legal protection as well, and legal rights. So I was very happy on the 26th of September, the ministry shared, and May was there as well, that's why I'm also looking at her. The ministry shared, not only shared, involved different sectors. The Minister of Transportation, I'm not saying that this policy is yet enforced. exactly. I'm not, for sure not. What I'm saying, no, what you're talking about is very, very important in the sense that there's always been a discussion about when a child, after struggling with all those barriers in the school system, and then he goes to the university, and then he has, let's say, a borderline success mark in this tawjihi. And the university does not accept him. The problem is that this student, we're not doing favors for anybody. This student has to enter in the university because the quality of education, the 50 or the 60 he received he had so many obstacles in the school system that if they were removed from the beginning, this student could have achieved much higher. So you cannot even put extra barriers even in the universities. So yes, I think what I'm saying is that there's an awareness within the inclusive education policy that all sectors involved within the child's learning are foreseen at least, but the capacity of involving them as such, I really don't know at which stage that there's a legal or a sectoral strong coordination on that. But by the way, there's a Palestinian law, a disability law, which, I mean, there are many issues around it, but there's also lots of space at least the main ground of it is a rights-based, although there are many restrictions in it, for sure. So it's basically, what I also believe in is that the grounds is there. It's how to really advocate for that and how to really make use of what exists. And this document, at least within the education sector, it's a good document, let's say. The least to say it's a good document that has a lot of space for a lot of empowerment to really facilitate the development and promoting inclusive education or the inclusive approach within the education. By the way, the Palestinian Ministry of Education Strategic Plan, the latest one, which is 2014-2019, one of the main goals in it is I don't know exactly the wording, but it's actually to facilitate or to ensure quality inclusive education for all. The title is it's a general education strategy, but actually it emphasizes on providing inclusive education, not necessarily in the details, but the perception is there. And this policy, by the way, one of the most important points in this policy is that this policy is no longer needed once we have an education law. We still don't have an education law because education law didn't go through because of the problems of the legislative council. That was never. Now the Minister of Education is pressing on having an education law which integrates the principles of this policy within the general law. So there's also this vision as well. Okay. I hope that I didn't confuse you. No. Okay. So anyway, I also wanted to share with you. We're still in the path of what's the time? Because I want to leave the forum for discussion. Talked a lot. Okay. I'm still going through the main course of the inclusive education, and again, I'm emphasizing on that perspective. Whole school approach, whole community approach. It's the same thing. With education, we cannot exclude anyone. It's the school's culture, it's the students, the community, the whole school. This is what the whole school approach. It involves parents, teachers, policies, curriculum, teaching, and learning. It sounds as though there's sometimes repetition, but these are all the core principles that we really need to overemphasize and make sure that we're not just, when we talk about the whole school approach, when we talk about any intervention in the community, we really have to involve all. And basically, I think all of it at the end comes back to valuing diversity. Inclusive education is celebrating diversity. It's the cornerstone of inclusive education. celebrating human diversity, it stands in exact opposition to the idea that some children need fixing and implies that it is the school and curriculum that need to be adapted to address the diverse student needs. So basically, when we say celebrating diversity, it's not because we really like the way that everybody looks different. It's basically doing something about it and valuing it, accommodating for it, adapting for the diverse needs. One way of responding to a variety of students' needs in the classroom, and I had a very interesting discussion, by the way, during the break with a group of teachers who told me that they had to leave because they came back from school and it's late for their families now. And it was very, very interesting because I think there are many, many challenges. It's not just a matter of I celebrate the diversity, I adapt to the diverse needs. There are things that we really need to do in the classroom. And this, one of the ways is to differentiate teaching. An example that I was just talking with Suhair, my colleague, a minute ago, differentiating teaching is that I have to give Suhair what Suhair needs, what Salma needs, what Andrea needs, and in this way, according to that, the differentiation I can address and I can really celebrate the diversity. It includes modifying, diversifying what is being taught, how it is taught, to the way in which students show their learning. Example about, and it was interesting because I wish that the teachers were here, about what it goes back to policies and practices. One of the main things that we have really been struggling for in the schools is that how can I claim that I'm creating an inclusive setup for a child, and at the end of the day, the principal and the teacher, even if the teacher feels that, well, you know, Guya knows everything, but she can't write, you know, and I don't know what to do, that, you know, nobody's supporting Guya in her knowledge, in expressing what she knows. How can I support a child whom I'm creating obstacles towards that I'm unable to address and to remove? And one of the main obstacles is granting the children during the classes and the tests accommodations. Is that I have a difficulty in writing and in reading, but if somebody reads the text for me, I'm able to give you the answer. So it is an obligation. It is a duty. I'm not giving you something because poor Andrea needs somebody to read. And then when he gets 8 out of 10, I say, no, no, no. I'll give him 6 out of 10. It's enough for him. He used to take 3 out of 10. So you need policies, and it's a right. It's very important to talk, to fight for the classroom and test accommodations and modifications for the children. And this is something that I think part of the advocacy, the policies and the cultures and the practices that we were talking about, that there are examples of practical things that we really need to make sure that we are all moving towards or working towards. Okay? So, okay. Then I had something else in mind. I don't know how much energy you have. The barriers, resources, and the support. I'm thinking maybe to open a small discussion about this. I mean, what are the barriers to learning participation? Would you like to share with us? What do you think, as learners as well, even when you were at university, at school, and who experiences barriers to learning? Who experiences the barriers? Everyone. But maybe more. Some people are more vulnerable.
Yes, I have a sister who has a problem to her eyes. And so in school in Italy, for all the school until high school, she had a tutor that could read for her during the classworks. So it's the same thing that you were saying. During the lesson, she listened by herself, but during the test, she had a tutor. So I think it's important that there is a person dedicated to the person with special needs. To tell you that this thing works, now my sister graduated in medicine, so even if she had this kind of problem. So for sure, the financial issue to allocate a special person for people with special needs, because even if you change the system, you cannot pretend that a single teacher can face the problem and the issue of all the children, in particular if it's a minority that has a particular peculiar problem. For sure, you need to have a tutor, in my opinion. So this is the thing that I think.
Any comments about what our colleague has just, or would like to open the discussion? Anybody? Okay, interesting. What you were saying is that obviously at times, but in this case, what was happening is that although your sister had a visual difficulty or impairment, I don't know, but you said the visual difficulty, obviously the obstacle was the exam, right? Yes. So what was done is that the system had to change so that she is able to, because unfortunately, everywhere around us, it's for sighted people who have no sight problem. So the problem is not with the person who has a visual. We see it as a problem because the whole world around is not accommodated for that. So I agree with you in that sense that, yeah, sometimes you have barriers in the sense that the barrier, in this case, that who experiences the barriers? So although she had, I don't see the visual impairment, it is a barrier. It became a barrier because of the setting. It was solved when the environment or something or another human resource was able to accommodate for that. But then there's a very tricky question about, do we always have to have extra people in the classroom to help the students? This is a very, very important question. Exactly. Alessandra is saying that no, because it's not inclusive. Okay? Having an extra person in the classroom as a co-teacher, as a partner in the teaching process, assisting this teaching process and supporting it, sometimes can facilitate if a child, sometimes, but it has to be, you have to really be very aware on training that person, and that person is a source of extra support and a resource for the whole class, But if, and it happens a lot in many schools, private schools and government schools, that your child has so high levels of difficulty, the school cannot accommodate, but if you provide an assistant, then yes, he's welcome, okay? So what happens is that you end up, is that in every class, or whatever, not every class, you have an assistant who basically does not work in partnership with the teacher. Also, the teaching material is not accommodated, and basically, physically, this child is included in the classroom, but he goes with his other teacher. He's not part of the educational process. So in one way or another, at times, of course, you need a learning support teacher in the class, of course. But this in itself also needs to be, I mean, in a sense, if you have a child who has, let's say, high physical needs, as an example, that child requires the teacher, assistant, even if it's not even education, sometimes educational, sometimes it's not. So the presence of an extra adult, and not necessarily always, at times in the classroom, can be necessary. But that person has to have a major role in the whole education system, otherwise this child becomes excluded. So it's really a matter of how you plan, how you work in collaboration, how the voice of the child is you need to make sure that is heard.
The needs of the child, because it depends on the needs. You consider not only people with disability, but many other kind of protected and vulnerable persons. So I think you have to see how efficient it is for any single case. And maybe the answer is not only one. Maybe it depends on the situation.
Of course, every situation has its own circumstances, but you have to have general, clear guidelines. You can't make, the general, clear guidelines have to apply for all. In the sense that child protection doesn't mean that even if a child has specific needs that might be out of reasons of frustration, that this child might cause, disruption in the class, and he's disrupting, it's very possible. If some of you are teachers here, it's very possible. You have a disruptive child, maybe as students, you were aware that you had a colleague in class. This child was too disruptive. I don't know if I'm answering or discussing the same area. It's in the sense that the problem becomes, what is the problem that is causing this disruption? In a sense that the child protection is responsible, every child in the class, I'm responsible as a teacher for all children. Of course, in the sense that Or even in every class, I might have different circumstances, but under the general, the same rules and guidelines of responsibility. But of course, this does not every shoe fits everybody. Of course, I mean, otherwise we're not inclusive. but the general guidelines have to be there for sure. I mean, this is how I see it, at least. Okay. I mean, the idea, I just wanted to reflect about the barriers, the resources, and the support in the sense that, yes, some children are more vulnerable than others. Yes, some children need different support than others, not necessarily extra, different support than others. But how do I address that? And how do I mobilize the resources? In the community, I can mobilize the resources sometimes from the family who can come in the classes and help the child if he needs extra help. I can facilitate the movement, the accessibility also from the community, from like university students. It's a matter of allocating the resources and being aware that those resources are for the benefit of facilitating the inclusive practices and development in the school. It's not at all an easy, it's a very challenging mission, but at the same time, the need, every door we find closed in front of us, we have to try to open it and try to see if this is closed, then we can open the other one. So this is, I find the resources, allocate them. It's not magical solutions at all, but it's basically an approach. Okay? So, let's go to, okay, and then, I think we're also touching on this. This was a question I wanted to share with you as well. Which challenges do we face putting inclusive education framework and practices? Many challenges. What kind of challenges do you foresee? What do you think that we can, I mean, and how do we handle them? I don't know, would you like to share? Who would like to?
I'm going to talk about this from our context, and I think that as I see it, working in inclusive education, I think the major challenge is the identification of children, because I think there's not a very well-defined system that identifies the needs of children. And I think sometimes people might think that children have learning difficulties, but upon testing, they really don't. They just need more support and more attention in class. So I think a system for identification of children, and I don't just mean children with disabilities, but I also mean talented children or any kind of like children. So I think the needs, and I think another thing is what you've been discussing today also raises the question of whether an inclusive education school actually replaces a special education schools, because I think that this is a major question, and I think there's much confusion within our context if an inclusive school should replace a special education one. So if from your experience you can answer that, that would be great.
Shall we?
I guess it's more connected even to what we were saying before about barriers. In my experience, what I saw in which kind of difficulties you can face with an inclusive education is connected with the cultural idea in the school, for example. So what I had experienced in first person was that when there is one of these cases of with the kids with different challenges, he needs to have maybe he needs to be followed more than the others. So sometimes the parents of the other kids are they are not so happy that all the program is going slow than it is expected, and they have the higher expectation for the level that they should reach. And sometimes it's this one, the problem, that the idea that is not a matter for all the others, and we are speaking even about all the society, for example, with the physical barriers. For example, I'm thinking about who is going with a wheelchair. No one is thinking, the world is thinking about with the legs, not with a wheelchair. So why you create two steps instead of something that facilitates someone to enter in. I guess one of the biggest barrier we are facing, or at least I have faces in my experience, is a cultural one. So not everybody are interested, or not everybody are involved in the idea that should be something easier for each one easier. Thank you.
Just because I want to add something, because I think that the problem of the stigma, it's also linked about the meaning of learning. So what we mean about education, what we want to learn, what we want to teach to our children. So I think it's an issue of awareness about the skills that the children have to develop during the school period, during the educational period.
I was actually going to discuss in that direction. Is that and I will. Okay.
One of the challenges that I think we have, also answering to you, Mike, the identification of the needs of children, I don't think it is a challenge, because I think it's a challenge because the teachers themselves are not trained enough and trained in a way that the general education teachers, I mean the classroom teachers, are not being able to identify the needs of the children. They don't know how to do it. They're not trained to do it. So in that case, if we train more teachers to be able to identify the needs of the children, this challenge might be.
I think also the collaboration has a responsibility as well in identification of children. So I think there should also be kind of collaborative work.
I agree with you totally about the cultural problems, but concerning the identification, I'm also with the. I mean, more with the. Teachers need to understand that every child learns in a different way. You have specific challenges for sure. In a sense, sometimes you need more professionals to assess the specific challenges, for sure. But I think we still are at a stage that, as Suhair was saying, that teachers really need to, and to understand that, and I think as I understood from Simone as well, is that we really have to understand the needs and the different needs, and this is how we can, and it's basically it's a question about the cultural barriers as well, is that when parents come and they discuss, as you said, like they object because the teacher is taking, wasting the time because Suhair is slow. So basically, what about, so it goes back to the practices. It goes back to what we want our children to learn. It goes back to the culture of identifying what do we want from our school systems as well. What kind of skills do our children need? It goes back to a traditional classroom where the teacher puts everything on the blackboard and you have, no communication. Everybody has to wait because they're not engaged in the education. They have no tasks in their hands. They're basically waiting for Suhair to finish copying the lesson because she needs more time, and the teacher is being so kind because she's, taking care of Suhair because she needs the time, and then all the other kids start kicking, pushing, or whatever. So the problem is back to what do we want from the learning and the school system. How do our children learn? So this is how, in a sense, that when we change the culture by changing our practices, and to change the practices so that the practices become part of our daily practice, we need the policies also to back us. In a sense, in a school, the teachers were telling me how they were doing things and trying to change, but then the principal doesn't allow. So it's basically, we go back to this triangle of barriers, and of course the parents are part of that, for sure. The question is, how do we engage the parents? I mean, as a teacher for many, many years, many of my colleagues would come and they'd really feel intimidated and provoked from the parent because the parent is always coming and nagging and saying da. There's a problem. You need to build the trust. This parent is he's the child's expert in one way. Another way, he's also sometimes maybe yeah, possibly. Exactly, in that sense. So you really, it's the dynamics of a relationship of that you really have to be aware of, because that child, the parent is the sole responsible at some point, but you are sharing that responsibility, and you have to really work on that. So you work on attitudes, you work on practices. These are all barriers, but then it's a system. I'm not saying that we change the system in a day and a night, but we really need to believe in what we're doing, and we see it as part of it. Yes, 80% of what we learn, if not more, I think, we don't remember after school. We don't need to memorize these days. We have it all on our smartphones, everywhere. There's no need. I mean, we need to learn skills in life, basically. Of course, we need to learn how to read and write, but basically, the expectations of the school system are expectations. I mean, I don't want to sound very radical, but the school system is a system that is created to keep the status quo as such, and it's our role to see how things are moving in a direction which is in the benefit of our children. And I'm not saying to make a revolution, but I'm saying that yes, we can do the change also for whatever society we have, but at least it's for the benefit of all, and to make sure that it's for their right. So it's a process. That's why, I mean, it's an ongoing issue of dealing with the community, with the parents, with advocacy, with raising awareness, with opening dialogues, with removing barriers at times, in a sense that, yes, raising the voices with the parents and loudly, because it's their right to say that I don't want this and that and this, and they can make the change if we support them as well. Anyway, any other? Okay. So, many challenges, but we can always find ways, and we have to, how to deal with those challenges. Okay, so just to share with you a nice project, beautiful project that some people here have invested all their passion in, with the children, with the engagement of the children, of course. I mean, we all are looking for a child-friendly, green environment and lovely. I know children, maybe they would break the tree or whatever, and we say, what are they doing? We need to work with, we need to nurture the connection with nature, with the environment, its values, basically. Yes, and environment is part of that as well. And here I come to, it is not my area of expertise at all, but since I know that some sectors are working in WASH, and we were discussing with Andrea in particular, how, if I'm going to present something about inclusive education, but inclusion as an approach, how is it cross-cutting also with the other areas of intervention? So, as we're talking about, I mean, I quoted from WaterAid, from their Equity and Inclusion Framework 2010, and I mean, since I'm not a WASH expert at all, I said I should do my homework. So I went and I was, seeing how to connect as well. I mean, believing for sure, without doing the homework, that inclusion is everything we do in our life. But then I wanted to see how to reflect it also in other interventions as well. And again, it was confirmed in my mind that it's a principle where we can approach it in all our interventions. So inclusive service recognizes that users come in all shapes and sizes and have different needs. It provides a flexible service to try and accommodate as many users as possible, ensuring facilities are accessible and easy for all to use. Inclusive WASH is not just about improving access to services to everyone. It mainstreams a rights-based approach to support people to engage in wider processes and ensure their rights are recognized. I mean, I thought that I'd share this with you to see that inclusion is, yes, in all aspects of life, but it has to be within the framework of the work, regardless of the challenges behind it. So all inclusive WASH programs must address the key elements of the social model of inclusion, emphasizing society rather than the individual as the problem, participation, involving different users throughout the program cycle and being non-discriminatory and recognizing the different needs of different people. Anybody would like to share who's involved in WASH projects? Anybody would like to comment? Maybe it's getting too late, a bit tired. Okay? Okay, so maybe I would like to at least end with a few slides and maybe leave the last half an hour also for discussion and engagement together. Okay, I wanted to, basically it's re-emphasizing what we've been talking about, but then more concentrating on inclusion is the process of ensuring that all are able to participate fully. And it's not easy, but we need to make sure. We need to work towards that, regardless of how much we achieve. Inclusion is a continuous process and a cross-cutting issue. In that perspective, I go back and I say how I don't see it as a project-based. It cannot be project-based, but any project has, if there is, has to support in these values, in this direction, so that we really can reach everybody as such. It's not just about improving access to services. It's not just beautifying an area. It is not just providing, but also supporting people. It is not like, and many of us have experienced this. You go to the school. There's a culture that I think the organizations, whether international or local, or it's a cycle, where we go to the schools. And what are the needs? 10 laptops, okay? And there are already maybe 10 laptops in the store, and maybe all of you know that. The idea is that it's an opportunity, because they are used to the organizations to come and to give those laptops. And then, so if they don't ask for the laptops, this would be another lost opportunity. So we stack laptops, they're of no use, or maybe each one will have a laptop, and then I'm telling about the experience in the schools. I'm not underestimating the schools as such, all respect to them, but I'm saying that it's a culture that we are all contributing in one way or another. It actually, we really suffered so much going to a school, asking them, okay, let's assess the needs. You have a colored printer, let's get the ink. There's no need to get another colored printer, because we discovered that there are two, so let's use them otherwise. And it really becomes a discussion and then of engagement of what we need. So it's not just improving the services and bringing stuff, it's engaging. It's making sure what is the need of the context itself. And making sure that regardless of what I assess is needed, what I think and I believe that this context needs, I really need to understand. And how would I understand the needs unless I engage with the community, with the needs, with the context. So basically, it's including those who are discriminated against and marginalized to engage in a wider processes, to ensure that their rights and needs are recognized. For example, in planning and managing the service delivery, in decision-making, and in holding duty bearers to account. They have to be part of the process. If they were not part of the process, then there's something lacking. So, that perspective, this is also the inclusive approach of how to guide us in our work. So, equity and inclusion are interrelated. In practice, addressing them requires better recognition and understanding of the differential needs of individuals and groups, identifying and tackling the root causes of exclusion, promoting and supporting their inclusion decision-making processes, and identifying and implementing appropriate and sustainable solutions. So if I'm not recognizing and understanding the real needs of the groups and identifying why and what are the reasons, what are the barriers, regardless of whether I have control over the reasons or not, but I need to understand them to set my plans. Because some of the, I wish I could get rid of Qalandia. I can't. But there are things that there are things that are beyond our control, but we need to be aware what are the roots of the exclusion, and based on that, we can set our plans of action. and so that we implement appropriate and sustainable solutions. Okay, so moving from a focus on needs to a focus on rights. Okay? It's a bit funny. I've been telling you all day we need to address the needs. And now I come and I say, moving, I just noticed this actually now. But as words, but not as meanings. Moving from a focus on needs to a focus on rights. A needs-based approach aims to change people's situation of deprivation or lack of access to services. Yeah? We are really concerned. I'm not saying that we don't need to address the needs of the people. Okay? But usually, if it's based on a needs focus, people are viewed as passive recipients or beneficiaries. Okay? This approach may satisfy the needs of that group of people for now, but there are no guarantees that improvements in access will be sustained. We really go to lots of communities or in schools and we ask them and we ask for what are their needs, and we assume out of good intention that this is what they need. It is something that we think that maybe, I don't know, Suhair, if there's an example you'd like to share with us?
For example,
مثلا. I was just thinking, looking at you, maybe, yeah.
For example, when we started working in Zayem school, as Salma said before, 40% of the students come from the Bedouin community around Zayem area. And one of the things that we wanted to do to be able to connect the school and the community together is that to have like a fixed center or like what do you call it? A center in the community itself, a tent or a center, an educational center. So this, out of good intention, this is what we thought that they need. But of course, they freaked out, and they freaked out. Why? Because it's illegal for them to have a fixed or a stable. It's forbidden because of the occupation. Of course, it's an Area C, and it's yeah. So it's an E1, the E1 settlement. If you guys are familiar with. So this is what we mean by we have to understand from them what is the context and what we don't want you. Yeah, we don't want that, and we don't want to work with you.
The need was increasing the threat in this case. The need. So we really need to understand what if that need is not for the benefit of the community, and it's not just because, of course, it's the basic right of a shelter. Of a space, education space, of a sheltered, but then this was not the context. So a rights-based approach is a transformational development process in which people are the drivers and subjects of their own development. And this is where our role is to help in that process by promoting a rights-based approach, an inclusive rights-based approach, where people are, and this is where the sustainability, whether it's a short-term project or a long-term project, humanitarian, emergency, I don't know all those terminologies very well. It's actually, this is the driving force of how we can all support in the approach, an inclusive, sustainable, rights-based approach. And then I'd like to end with, I think, yes, that it's an ongoing journey towards equity. So inclusive education is a path towards an inclusive and equitable society. This is how inclusion and inclusion in education should be. I remember that just now May was asking about what do we do whether an inclusive school or a special school? I think all schools should be inclusive. Special education schools should be resource centers. I mean, they have valuable expertise. It was part of the journey of how education developed. So you cannot just forget that there were special schools, but you really need to do the transformation in the society where even the special education schools become part of that, the expertise there should be part of the inclusive school. Every school should be inclusive. And I mean, transforming schools into to be inclusive, welcoming for all is also an ongoing journey. So it's not just a recipe that we have ready for that. So let's share inclusive practices from the field if you have the energy. Okay, if you'd like to share your 2015 theme for the International Day for People with Disabilities. I really wanted to share it with you today because I thought it was, you know, I can see also the transformation of the themes year after year, because even that is a reflection of where perceptions and experiences are moving towards. Access, inclusion matters, first of all. Inclusion matters. It's not just a principle or a talk we just say about. It matters. It affects every single aspect of our lives. Access and empowerment for people of all abilities. Okay? So I wanted to share this, and I hope that this is also a theme that will drive us further towards hopefully achieving an inclusive, equitable society. So that's it for today. Any comments, any things you can share?
Just have a question.
Yes.
I mean, before, like, you were sharing inclusive wash.
Sorry?
Inclusive
wash. Yeah.
Okay. And which is interesting, you know, to think that inclusion is not something only related to access to disability. It's not something related only to education, but to be an approach related that could be really multi-dimensional somehow. And like just now, Isa was telling me, agriculture sometimes can't be inclusive because sometimes the farmer has to go in the land, and if he has like a physical disability, it's hard to, etc., etc. So I mean, I'd like to ask you if you, I don't know, now you are an expert in education, but more or less accidentally, the last years you are involved in international development. And so I'd like to ask you, which is for you an inclusive approach in international development in general? I know it's a hard question. I think in the master here in Bethlehem Master, they had one session on it, on the inclusive framework to international development. But I mean, I'm sure you will have something.
And at least I can share some ideas in the sense that, I don't know, I mean, even the concept of international development as itself for me is I mean, the definition of international development for me also is a concept in itself that opens dialogue in itself, whether it's inclusive or not. So I don't know where to start from, but I personally believe that, as you said, although for sure my experience is in the field of education, but in the community as well, so it's not just linked to, it was never separate, but also in a different context than the international development field. I cannot see it separable. But I see the need of the responsibility as well. There's a big responsibility behind, if we're really talking about values of inclusion, promoting inclusive values in education or in other aspects of our work, it has to be taken into consideration in that perspective, in a sense. I don't know if I'm answering, I'm on the right track of your question, because I'm finding it difficult, to be honest. It's just that I see personally that since it's a matter of equity, since it's a matter of social justice, making sure others are not excluded, then within the international development, all the perception and the work should be based on that, the advocacy on that. The role and the responsibility of the international development agencies or community, how to support the local community, the context in promoting those values, and on many different aspects. I don't know if I'm clear or not, or if I answer, because it's quite a tricky question for me. As you said, I'm somebody new in the international development picture, but it cannot be isolated as such. So, I mean, international development has many aspects as far as I know, in the sense that sometimes is it related to international solidarity in developing the community towards Palestinian society development, or is it part of this global west-east, north-south issue? For me, it's a bit complicated to answer. I'm very honest about that. Very, very complicated to answer. But yes, there is a big role within the international development as projects, cooperations, agencies, whatever, to really, really integrate, not only integrate not in the sense of integration, inclusion, but to be from within the inclusion as a principled value, because we started with the slide, inclusion is a principled value towards education and society. So yes, it has to be linked if we're talking about development. International development in one way or another is linked to every aspect of the Palestinian community. صح? Should be. Yeah. I don't know, I mean, it's not my area, but I see it, yes, in that perspective.
Because sometimes and I went, there are many parts of the approaches that also connect to inclusive education. You can also have an inclusive development.
Of course. I think in that perspective, I agree with you totally. And that's why I say it's a principled approach, because it's actually within every core of any sector we're working in, including that. Of course, I agree with you totally.
It doesn't mean only including people with disabilities.
No.
Building on what exists.
Exactly.
It means,
of course.
for instance, trying to see the challenges in different ways.
Exactly.
Not only as problems.
Exactly. And that's why building on what exists, I was saying that it's the role of the international development to nurture the inclusive education policy that the ministry has implemented. Yes, I totally see it in that direction. It's not at all, it goes back, of course, inclusion is about preventing exclusion, basically, and then this is a responsibility of it's not at all people with disability, although they are one of the most vulnerable sectors in society that are excluded. And of course, as Imnura just said, that yes, we have to adapt for a farmer who not only on a wheelchair, we have to find other ways of him either to go or to create lots of land or whatever that he can, yes, of course, there are many obstacles in agriculture, in wash projects, in education, and psychosocial. I can never, ever see psychosocial intervention as a separate field. How could it be? No way. A separate field in the sense that it is not, I'm not saying that inclusive education is also something that I do in a month or two, whatever. Yes, but it has to be done within the perspective. If I need to do an inclusive education project short term, it has to be within the plans of what exists and what was before and how it can be a contributing factor towards that, rather than means and ends. Yeah.
A practical question. The policies you show us are gonna be applied also to the East Jerusalem schools? So, for the Awqaf schools.
For all the schools that are under the
minister
and the Jerusalem schools that we are working in, of course, there are schools. There's no official representation, of course, of the Palestinian education, but they are the supervisors under the same. They are the only schools.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah, that's why it's very important in the regard. I think that it's going to take time for an action plan and how to move forward with this policy. But this is where, I mean, role, Terdizom working in schools, AFSI working in schools, Tadata working in schools, it's our role to make sure that we are supporting this. Now, actually, I think that our work, all our work, has contributed in the direction of this policy. It contributed even in the development in this direction as well. I'm talking about many people in the field, many sectors, many organizations. And it's our role, our responsibility also to support in that direction.
Involved in the design of this policy?
Yeah, actually the policy...
As NGO?
Yes. Actually, the policy last year was supported by, and this I don't want to discuss about how I see things, not necessarily how this policy, but in general, this is one of the drawbacks of the international development. Yeah, Valerio. One of the problems of international development, in what sense, is that you really support something. I mean, the local organizations or authorities in a direction which is support in a very positive way, but then it becomes like an up-down thing, you know, and it's not really totally participatory. And then it was financed. Even there was a big research that was financed by international organizations, and I think, I'm not being critical against anybody, but I think that this was a recommendation that came out from when it was launched last year, that it wasn't shared enough, in a sense that that's why it had many issues that needed to be reviewed. So of course, there was a committee with the ministry, a committee of different international organizations and locals as well, from the ministry, that reviewed. We were in it, that we reviewed actually word by word. Yeah, in a sense that to make sure it's a commitment. I'm not saying that we wrote word by word. We reviewed word by word. Because it's a commitment towards, it's a responsibility. And then it was to be printed in June, I think, and the printing stopped because, not stopped, was postponed, which was I thought was a very, very positive move from the Ministry of Education, because we have a new Palestinian Minister of Education who's very active, by the way, in he's very positive, and let's hope that he really achieves what he's. And yesterday, he did another exciting thing yesterday. Anyway, what I wanted to say about this minister is that they said that before printing it, we need to make sure that all the departments from the Ministry of Education, the general directors of the planning, I don't know what, are involved. And this policy was presented to all the sectors and with the presence of some organizations as well. And hopefully, it's to be printed. It's خلاص, no way back. As a policy, it's our role now how to move it forward. Yeah. And how to support it and how to assist, because it's a journey. And there'll be many obstacles. You need training teachers. And this is where the role of the international community comes. Development is to support local initiatives and to make sure that it is owned by the local authorities. And this is where it's sustainable. Okay. تمام. Okay. Thank you very much. I was really, I'm very happy. I was wondering about, to be honest, how the context of the audience and how I'll be. But then it was as engaging as always when talking about inclusive education, because it's a journey, a personal journey as well. Thank you all. Thank you all.